In Thailand, the children are now being imprisoned in little plastic jails against some invisible threat. We're told that the threat is C19, but yet there's still no evidence that the virus still hasn't been isolated. So whether it exists or not is really up in the air. Real prisoners go to prison. That's to protect the public. But when innocent people, especially children, are put into little plastic cages to protect them against the public, then we have an inversion. You put people in prison to protect the public. You don't put innocent people in prison. And that's what we're doing to the children. This is an inversion. Inversions are always used by occult practices. Whether you have a mass, a Christian mass, you invert it with a black mass. You get a crucifix, you turn it upside down. You get a pentagram, you turn it upside down. So inversion is always very, very important for these rituals. And what we're seeing with this COVID crisis is a very large ritual which is underway in order to help us go into the fourth industrial revolution, which is the technological age, which is where everybody has to become cyborg. At the moment, we've got the mobile phones, which are an extension, it's an outside extension of this smart technology, but soon that technology will be put into our systems. The children of today are our future. What happens to them will decide where the future is going to go. When you start to program the children when they're young, you're looking at a long-term plan to change what is ahead for us in the future. We've already seen this through Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg was sort of targeting the older young people, the people in their teenage years, to sort of invest fear, to seed fear into them. And that fear was to turn the adults against the children. The adults are our generation, or the 30s, 40s and upwards. And the older generation are being scapegoated as the problems of the world. The adults themselves have also been brainwashed. We're told that we need to believe in a consumer society, and we've destroyed the world in the process. The younger generation, they're being told that there's going to be no pensions, that the animals are going to go, that the whole world is under some great attack, and it's because of pollution. So that's the older generation of the children which have been seeded with these thoughts of fear and anxiety. Children are now getting very anxious, and there's new words which are coming out in psychological dictionaries to give to children which have got anxiety about the future. One of the main problems is the older generation, because the older generation have lived in a society which was pre-smart, which was pre-technology, and they went about their business. There was absolutely no problem at all. The children played on the streets, the children had a lot of freedom, that nobody had their faces put into systems. There was no facial recognition systems, and so society was fine in spite of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the IRA and other terrorist organizations. Life went on. People died sometimes. It was blown up in the media, but life still went on. And the younger generation are being told that it's impossible to live in that type of society. The society of the future has to be a society which is controlled, which is taken out of the autonomy of the older generations, or humans in truth, and it needs to be put into some sort of smart technology to control us, because we as humans aren't capable of doing that ourselves. And so this whole movement is now going towards the smart era. So it's a preparation for AI technology. AI, artificial intelligence, is the future. That's what's going to be controlling us. It will control the traffic, it will control health, it will control education. In order to control humanity, you need to do it on a lot of different levels. And one of the best ways is to do it through education, because all the children need to go through education. So in order to start creating behavior modification, you can use the C19 to do that. All these little children have been put into little plastic cages, and we don't know what the psychological effects of that is at the moment. That's something which will come out in the future. But it's a very subtle type of programming. It's obvious to us, but it's a subtle type of programming for the child, and it's to do with obedience. You're being told that you have to do things, and when you want to control people, you start to control them by making them do small things, by making them do things for you. Pick that up, sit down there. But now what we're doing is we're telling children to sit by themselves in isolation in these little cages, and not to have contact with anyone else. And if they do that, they can get punished. They're told to wear certain items like face masks because it's for the greater good. Whether it is or it isn't, you're being told to do things and you've got a threat or a reason. The reason is the threat in order to do it. Whether the threat is real or not real doesn't matter. But the issue is that young children are being trained to do things for the greater good of humanity, to save humanity. The older generations are already being silenced. If you look on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube, what's happening is that the people that have come from an era pre-COVID are telling people that there is something called freedom, and they're telling people what that is. They're telling the people of a world that can exist without control. And so in order to prepare for the future, you need to get rid of that older generation. First thing you do is you start silencing them. You start banning them. You take them down from Twitter. The other thing that's happening is the laws which are now being tried to be passed by people like Katie Price, which is to do with trolling. Now, trolling is when you start to have a go or you make annoying comments towards someone. That trolling is now being called hate speech. But hate speech is subjective. People that are white can't make any speech about people of colour. Heterosexual people aren't allowed to make statements about transgender people or sexuality. People that do know something are being closed down, and what they have to say, because it doesn't coincide with the modern narrative, the woke new narrative, they therefore, when they get closed down, they're being called hate speakers. Now, if you have laws which are introduced which say that people are haters and they're making hate speech, that is something entirely subjective. If the government that comes in is a woke government, or they're being pushed to be woke, then the laws that they create and the subjective ideologies that they have in the courts of whether something's hate or not hate is not an objective truth, it's a subjective truth. And that subjectivity is going to be aiding the new world order as it comes into effect, as we're seeing it happen right at this moment. You need to turn the kids against the adults, and you can do that through the psychological programming. That's being done at school, it's being done through Greta Thunberg. You sow the seeds now. The COVID also is not allowing old people in hospitals to be resuscitated or revived. If an old person gets COVID, they're supposed to die. Because the old people, as I've said, they have a remembrance, they remember things, and we need to start getting rid of old information. The internet, because you can delete things off it, you can therefore start deleting old stories and old ideas. You can delete music, you can delete books. If everything goes onto the internet, then you can decide what people can see and what they can't see. We're going to start seeing more attacks against the older generation. We're going to start seeing splits. We're going to start seeing the younger generation turning against the older generation. We're going to start seeing the medical profession not helping the older generation. We've got a lot of people that are getting old and they're not dying. People haven't been living longer. There's just more people which are living at 70. 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, people were still hitting 70, 80 years old. People died back then because of the lifestyle. The lifestyle now is allowing more people to reach 70 or 80, but we're not seeing people of 70 or 80 get to 100 or 120. So we have to be very careful about this idea that old people are living longer. There's just more people that are getting old. And that's very dangerous, because if there's more people getting old and they can vote, then they can decide what governments go in. If you want a new government to come in, which is going to be voted in by younger people through the brainwashing and the behavior modification that they're receiving at school, you then need to get rid of the older generations. The younger generations getting fewer and fewer, and they're going to become a minority. So you need to make way for them to vote in the way that the government wishes them to vote, in order to bring in the new technological smart age and the smart cities. Children are also now coming into classes. All the classes have been put online because the future of education is online education. With online education, you don't have teachers which are old telling the children how things used to be. You're going to get rid of them. So you're just going to have information which is being controlled, given to the students. That controlling education is not going to give them a clear view of what the history and what the past is. And one person can control, or very few people can control that information. That information creates modifications in the mind, and it creates a perspective of reality. Once the perspective of reality has been created, then the behavior also is paralleled or linked to the perception. So if you can get the children to go online because of the COVID and they can't speak to their peers, they can't have discussions, then the education, the individual is becoming isolated, and they're starting to look at that information that they are given as truth. The teachers are slowly being pushed out of the school as a result. What we're seeing is that the AI is taking over. The AI is going to control what's going to happen in the future. It's going to control what the children are thinking. It's going to control the jobs of the future, and it's going to control the education in order to get those jobs. The jobs will be AI jobs. There'll be more information, technology things, which is not human. It's anti-human. It's a smart world. We as humans have human conditions, human problems. Just because you change the way that we live doesn't mean that our emotions change. For instance, if you get an animal and you make the animal domesticated and you put the animal into a farm, you can still get the animal to live for a very long time, but the animal also goes through stress. If you look at the way that you treat animals, how you contain them, although they've become domesticated, they can live in the factories and the farms that we create. Their emotions still haven't changed, and they still suffer as a result. And that's exactly what's going to happen to us. As we're being pushed into these smart cities, we will then have to live in that particular way, but it doesn't address our emotions. And what will happen is we'll get ill. And the resolution to being ill is going to be giving people more pills. They'll create medications in order for people to be able to live in these new societies, and we'll become a drug addicted society. So what they're doing is they're creating a situation where the children have to go online, where the children have to be obedient in order to learn things for the new future, which is AI, which is jobs that are going to be created, move them into smart cities. And the illnesses that happen or are created because of this will then be dealt with through mind behavior drugs, which will calm that down. If you like, Soma was a word that Aldous Huxley used in Brave New World in order to give people, in order to equalize their moods, their sort of mood enhancing drugs. All this is turning into obedience. The children have to go to school, the children have to be obedient, the children have to do what the society says, because the society tells the school tells the teachers tell the students. So the students are actually starting to do what the society wants through the school system. The students are therefore being programmed to grow up and to do what the government wants them to do in the name of health. And what we're going to see is new generations of people coming through which are completely different to our generation. And that's where the fight is going to happen between the new generations and the older generations. And that's why the older generations need to go.